Today, the Ascended Masters come to you standing on the threshold of the present moment and looking into the ethers of the future, of not only your individual destinies as torchbearers and light-bearers, as you move the swift, steep upward path, the short path that leads to your ascension, but as they look as the good shepherds to the race of all of the little lambs of the precious heart flames whom God doth love, who are themselves the expression of his own mighty heart in action. The Ascended Masters, in their great solemn wisdom, are looking to the laying of a foundation, of an instrument through which they can continue to operate not only throughout the balance of our tenure and lifetime in this office of Anointed Messenger, but for many hundreds and, God willing, thousands of years into the future. I'm sure that all of you would agree that it would be a poor life if each of you, every 5 years, were obliged to completely divest yourself of all that you have built as a foundation and begin going back to kindergarten and elementary school, learning all over again and building your career, and then shortly thereafter, starting all over again 5 years later, and then another 5 years after that. You can appreciate the wisdom in an accumulated momentum. And so, wherever possible, the Ascended Masters do desire to conserve the dispensation of light and energy which is afforded to them on behalf of this world, and to build upon the solid achievements of the past so that they and their unascended disciples can move from glory unto glory and unto greater glory, as is the divine plan. In order for this to be accomplished, they do have to factor in the X factor, or what might be better described as the question mark factor of human nature, of individual human nature, as well as the nature of the entire race of mankind. It is our fond hope that we may bequeath to future generations, and if I might borrow from the cliched term, even those yet unborn, bequeathing to them an activity of light, a fellowship, a community of light bearers into whose loving arms, parentage they can be born and grow within the protective envelope, the joyous, happy atmosphere of such an Ascended Master ecclesia, working out their own salvation, working out the questions of their own identity, forging that God identity, and building upon the great sacrifices of the few and the many, as we ourselves are now straining to build this foundation once again. This is a matter and a question of no small import, both to the Ascended Masters and to each and every one of you, I am sure. Most especially, it is a matter of keen interest to all who have been many decades the disciples of the Ascended Masters and their devotees in their sponsored activities that they themselves have sponsored down through the ages. By the time of our meeting here today has drawn to a conclusion, we would hope that we can leave with each and every one of you certain unimpeachable foundation stones that you may rely upon, come what may. Those being, in summary, first of all, your own blessed, mighty I am presence. The keystone, the fountain stone, the cornerstone in your own identity. This is a rock of divine selfhood that you are being taught to trust, to come to know, to rely upon and draw forth in the good and bad times, the crises of your life, and to realize once and for all that this blessed rock of identity in your presence can and will respond each and every single time you call, and that in that shuttle of love and communion that moves between the shores of your identities is to be found that love that overcomes all things in the world, all adversities, and resolves all difficulties. So this, above all, is the keystone and the key ingredient to the problem solving of one's life. In addition to that, we are seeking to empower you with a certain knowledge of the impersonal truths of cosmic law. Truths that are no respecter of any man's person, be he or she ascended or unascended. Truths that are like principles of physics, acting like with the unerring accuracy of the laws of gravity or electromagnetism, and only superseded, if they are superseded at all, by greater, more powerful laws, such as the law of love itself, from which has sprung all the lesser panoply of natural law. So you are being tutored, and more than just tutored, you are having your feet placed squarely and firmly on the foundation of cosmic law, the very law by which all of life is governed. Having been ignorant and blind to these laws has not immunized humanity from bearing the brunt of the pain of suffering which comes from flying in the face of those laws. This is a very important point that we hope all of you will come to realize, that cosmic law is not dependent upon anyone's human goodness, anyone's veracity in one sense of the word. It's not dependent upon anything personal, but rather it is the impersonal truth of life that you can rely upon for its unerring accuracy. The Ascended Masters long ago discovered this law, and they discovered the wisdom of operating in cooperation with cosmic law, of living according to its tenets, and by so doing, never having to incur the return deposit on their doorstep of miscreations of the past, because all that they would sow in love and harmony brought back only the fruitage of that selfless love and harmony as greater and greater increase of the goodness and the abundance of God in their own lives, which became, in long last, a great cresting wave, a great incoming current of cosmic light that caught them up in the whirlwind of the Holy Spirit and buoyed them up even unto the victory of their ascensions. So Acropolis Sophia, so much of what you have learned has been empowering you with these principles of cosmic law, together with a healthy respect and reverential awe for the power of this law. In times past, this respect was referred to as the fear of the Lord, which was the beginning of wisdom. It was the recognition that one does not with impunity fly in the face of that law. One does not seek to warp or distort the interpretation of the law to one's own ends. This began a long time ago with the proverbial fall of mankind in the Garden of Eden, when there were certain simple black and white statements that were made to the original couple there in the garden. Amongst them, simply the statement that there was a certain tree of dubious fruit that happened to grow in the garden, and the nature of that fruit was to impart experiential, first-hand awareness in the vibration of relative good and evil. And the injunction was given to these two that they should neither touch that tree, much less eat of the fruit of that tree. But having a certain inclination in that direction, we happen to know that Eva, that first primeval woman, distorted that and said and reasoned within herself that she would not surely pay the consequences of that. So not only are we seeking to impart to you what these principles are, but also we are seeking to impart to you wisdom. And that understanding that one does not with impunity reinterpret the law for one's own purposes. The third and final key that we would like you to have in your hearts always as you go forth, and a key that we wish to bequeath to all future generations of light bearers and torch bearers and members of the devotees of the Ascended Masters in future ages, is the active role of the hierarchy of Ascended Masters and of your faith and confidence that there is this dynamic, living, breathing fabric and a fraternity or a sorority or a brotherhood or a sisterhood. There aren't a lot of politically correct words to describe today that are androgynous in nature, but nevertheless, there is this spiritual organization of Ascended Masters who have not spun around on their heel once they have found themselves free. They haven't taken a basin like Pontius Pilate, washed their hands of this earth and all of its problems, and looked away into the heart of the great central sun and forgotten about the plight of mankind of earth. Far, far from it. Rather, this dynamic brotherhood is moving in whatever possible way they can, far and wide across the face of the earth, always probing, always searching for ways in which they can be of assistance. They are concerned about the individual disciple of the Ascended Masters. They are concerned about each and every one of you. They bear a great personal, intimate love and knowledge of not only who you are in this life, but of the great God presence that has come forth countless times in many, many embodiments. And as you understand the extended hand of cooperation, which is constantly sent forth by these ascended brethren, you will come to know that you can rely upon them. That as circumstances assail you in your own life experience from time to time, whether you be affiliated with an activity such as the Temple of the Presence or not, even should you find yourself apparently alone amongst all of the millions of peoples of the earth, you would not be alone, because you would have your tie to the living hierarchy of light that reaches from this earth all the way to the great central sun. And this hierarchy dotes upon you and is in service to your mighty God presence, and through that, service to you personally. So you may trust, above all, that the Brotherhood of Light is looking out for your welfare, and that if you will simply give them the opportunity by making your calls and extending your faith through your mighty I Am presence, you shall find, as you stay the course and hold to that faith, that the Brotherhood will not be found wanting. One of the things which we have counseled individual students about from time to time who have entertained a sense of injustice about their own personal treatment, their own lot in life, and they have looked sideways in a silent accusation, whether or not perhaps some of the ascended masters could have done more, should have intervened. Why did they not? All of this. We have pointed out that when the time comes and they themselves are free to read the Akashic record of the efforts of the Brotherhood which have gone on behind the scenes, that they will find that not in one single instance ever will the Brotherhood be found to have been wanting in providing the necessary assistance, all the assistance that the great law would allow, and more so. I think sometimes some of the ascended masters could best any of those yogic postures that look so impossible in the ways in which they approach the lords of karma with these sweet arguments on our behalf, seeking from every point of the compass to find ways to bring dispensations of opportunity and mercy to their disciples. Many's the time the lords of karma have to hide a wry smile on their own with the ingenuity and inventiveness of your sponsors who are always looking out for you and able to enter into a full lotus and many, many other contortions, if need be, to provide for you. So trust that the hierarchy of light is always by your side. They will never fail. They no longer have an Achilles heel of human frailty that might inhibit their assistance to you at a critical moment. They are clean free of all of that and now stand strong and illumined and furthermore, and perhaps the most important of all, possessed of a love that you can hardly conceive, a personal interest and love and compassion in each of your lives and the lives of many of the millions of life streams of this earth, possessed of that love that desires above all that you should enjoy the same freedom and bliss in the ascended octaves as they themselves. So this is very much the case. And all of these three things which I have outlined to you at this moment, if you'll notice, do not necessarily in and of themselves associate themselves with a given organization, an outer organization. I'll be coming back shortly to the bylaws of the Temple of the Presence, which we worked on quite diligently with Master Moria and the Mahachohan several years ago. In putting all of these bylaws together, I recall that we were not, at least outwardly, that aware of, in particular, that Saint Germain was too much involved in the structure of those bylaws. Maybe this is more of a first-ray activity. I can certainly understand it. But there was one occasion when beloved Saint Germain did make his presence undeniably known as we were polishing those bylaws more and more. And he said words to the effect that you have sought to come up with a system that would be foolproof, that would anticipate everything that could go wrong with human nature, to provide for an out for all of that. And in that, you have made somewhat of an error, which perhaps cannot be helped. But I would like to point out to you that no human system and no human institution can really rise above the quality and the nature of those life streams who go to make up that system and that institution. So focus, if you will, on training the members, raising up the shepherds, the leaders, imparting to them the spiritual flame, because that living flame must permeate organizations. It must permeate members, and is as important, if not more so, than any set of rules that you might put down on paper by which individuals govern themselves. It is no better, and it cannot be any rise any higher than those who go in to making it up. So I think that this we have also come to understand, which brings us back to one of the main observations which the Ascended Masters wish to make about some of the events that are taking place in the world scene right now. We have arrived at a time, the seeds of which were sown many hundreds of years ago, when the principle of hierarchy was under assault across the face of the earth. We have arrived at a time which is also referred to way back in the book of Genesis by the Lord through Moses, and again later several times in the book of Judges. It's a time when every man does that which seemeth right in his own eyes. Every man doth that which seemeth right in his own eyes. There was a time when the tribes of Israel, having occupied the Holy Land, there was not a prophet in the land, nor had the system of kings been established at that time. You had certain leaders and elders in each of the 12 tribes, but basically you had a situation which purported to be liberty when every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And this made for a great deal of mischief, and rather than the quality of life being elevated to the highest that the examples of the shepherds and the leaders of that time could demonstrate, you had more a situation like we have in our land today, when everything seeks to be lowered to the lowest common denominator of the most numbers of peoples. And in religious conditions and religious situations, we have a situation where everyone feels they have the license to be a spiritual law unto themselves. The many millions of words that are in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation are like a Rorschach test. And everyone has given themselves permission to interpret their own psychology and impute it to the words of the Scripture. This has been demonstrated this past week in an issue that's come up before one of the largest and oldest of the Protestant denominations here in the United States of America. Perhaps that denomination might not never have come into being in the first place if a certain life stream of a degree of light several hundred years ago had been able to obtain permission to divorce his first wife. I'm speaking now of Henry VIII of England, who sought a divorce and permission to divorce his first wife from the Pope at a time when all of England was still very much Catholic. This issue was the sole reason, initially, why Henry leaned in the direction not of changing any of the theological precepts of the church per se, but where he substituted the person of the king or the monarch of England for the person of the Pope in Italy. That was the main shift of power that occurred. It wasn't necessarily over any doctrinal issues. It might have been fed by a dissatisfaction with some abuses that undoubtedly did go on in the Catholic Church in England at that time. Nevertheless, this entered into an area that even during the time of Henry VIII, and certainly became a wildfire immediately on the heels of the separation of the Church of England, where the interpretation of doctrine was left up more and more to whomever could read the Latin or eventually the English translations of the Bible. And little by little, there has been the balkanization of Christianity since the time of the Reformation. By balkanization, I'm talking about what has occurred. That's a political term of what happened decades ago in Eastern Europe, where you started out with large countries, that you removed the central power, and all of a sudden there started to be a fractionalizing. And then those fractions similarly fractionalized and fractionalized. And so it has been with the Protestant denominations that have continued to separate out and separate out. Today, I'm not at all concerned about the particular issue that was the reason for the issues that came up this week past, and the months past. What I'm concerned about is the idea that it has come to the point where everyone does that which seemeth right in their own eyes. Everyone can bend and twist the words of Scripture to suit their own needs. It very much reminds me of the cartoon of Peanuts that I refer to from time to time. And I'm thinking now not of the lemonade stand that little children put out, but of when the sign changes from lemonade, 3 cents a cup, to Lucy sitting behind the lemonade stand with a sign above her that says, "The psychiatrist is in." And you can have a psychiatric session for 5 cents. And on various occasions, various of the other young characters come up and receive her pithy insight into their character traits, character flaws, and so forth. And that is what has happened in very much of the Protestant faith. From east to west, from the Ozarks, where they believe in taking up snakes to be absolutely true. As Carolyn was speaking during this past week's seminar of how the extremes of speaking in tongues have been carried out by many evangelical Protestant sects, where they have not the foggiest notion of the mechanisms that are actually being engaged in by them. And yet they are banging the drum and playing the tambourine and merchandising their Christianity in a way that is certainly bringing in those who have not previously been part of the Christian community, who enjoy the entertainment, the new ways in which the worship is carried on with such a modern blend of the entertainment factor being introduced. All of this being a situation to where there is no safety net, there is no regard for what is being taught or what is being practiced. Jesus had a very apt statement for this. He said, "The blind shall lead the blind, and both shall fall into the ditch." You might ask yourself the question, what does this have to do with an Ascended Master activity? Perhaps today, blessed with a degree of good health and hope of longevity with ourselves in this office, today or tomorrow or next week, it might not seem to be of such importance. But for the long-range plans of the Ascended Masters, for the Temple of the Presence, it is a matter of monumental importance. And so we are seeking to put all of you on your guard and to make those standards known by which future shepherds and members of our activity, leaders of our activity, shall guard and guide themselves and their critical judgments that they shall have to make. Certainly, even in the lifetime of many who have been part of the baby boomer generation, for many decades now, part of the Ascended Masters' thrust here in North America, we know only too well how quickly things are possible to shift and how so much that has been done by the Ascended Masters can be undermined. This was true in the time of beloved Jesus as well. He was very much aware of it in his own lifetime. One of the parables that he gave spoke to this at a time when the Pharisees and the Sadducees of the established world order of that time, world religion of that time, were seeking to spar with him on wordplay and legalistic arguments to trap him into incriminating himself so that he could be hauled before the bar of their justice and silenced. Here is how he taught this very principle. There was a certain householder who planted a vineyard and hedged it round about and dug a winepress in it and built a tower and leased it to tenant farmers, and then went into a far country. And when the time of the fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the farmers that they might receive the fruits of the farm. And the farmers took his servants and beat one and killed another and stoned a third. Again, the Lord of the vineyard sent out other servants more than the first, and they did the same unto them. But last of all, he sent unto them his very own son, saying, They will reverence my son. But when the tenants saw the son, they said amongst themselves, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, that we might seize upon his inheritance. And they caught him, and cast him out of the vineyard, and slew him. What, when the Lord therefore of the vineyard cometh, what will he do unto those tenants? Then said those who were with him, He will miserably destroy those wicked men, and lease his vineyards unto others, who shall render him the fruits of their seasons. Jesus said unto them, Did ye never read in the Scriptures, The stone which the builders rejected, the same is become the head of the corner. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore do I say unto you, the kingdom of God shall be taken from you, and given unto a nation who shall bring forth the fruits of it. And whomsoever shall fall upon this stone shall be broken, but upon whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder. Of course, our own Jesus was referencing the great work of the ascended masters and of the mighty I Am presence throughout the 2,000 years of the Mosaic dispensation, the work through Moses, and of how the prophets themselves were like these magnificent servants who had been sent unto the tenant farmers who were the members of the land of Israel, the Israelites, and so often, as was the case, those who were sent out by the brotherhood found themselves under the sword of destruction. He himself, coming as the Son, was likewise rejected and put to the sword, put to the death by crucifixion. So this is, unfortunately, a pattern that is part of the human condition. It is part of the human dilemma. We can't get away from the necessity that institutions that are created by the ascended masters in this world, unfortunately, they have to be made up of people, do they not? They have to be made up of living, breathing heart flames that are not yet perfect. And so every institution is necessarily made up of and really consists of the people who have made it. But at the same time, it is true that the great credit goes to the ascended masters in the case of their ascended master activities. We are here. I include ourselves, Carolyn and I as well. We are all here because the bread of life, of the ascended masters' radiation, that charge of the sacred fire, which has its unmistakable signature of light and life, that is far from this world in its nature. We are here because of that living charge of their living presence. We're here because of the truth of the law that they send forth. We are here, and the temple is here because there is this light that has been allocated to this activity by the lords of karma that is flowing 24 hours a day, day and night. It continues to pour forth like the light from the sun. This living river of water is pouring forth, and we know that it is that fountain of divine love that has magnetized and will continue to magnetize all of the God good that accumulates as the living temple by way of each of us, each of you as a lively stone in that temple, by way of the abundance that is needed to raise up the physical buildings of that temple. All of this, we give glory and honor and credit to the ascended masters. I will call your attention and invite you to reread the introductory letter signed by Carolyn and I in the WESOC World Congress report, whereby we give credit to these ascended masters and point out that the very name itself, ascended master activity, references those magnificent ascended beings as the very heart of that activity. And as such, we should all have the sense that it belongs to them. It is for them to decide what happens. We look to them for that divine direction. We don't have the sense that it is ours to do with whatever we might choose to in our own impulse. It really doesn't belong to us. We are stewards, just like those farmers should have been stewards. And they should have passed along the fruit of their labors to the one who bought the vineyard, the one who gave it the protection, which is the hedgerow, the one who brought forth the winepress, which is the pressing out of the energies of life by the various flames of God. All of this belongs to the ascended masters. And evermore, there should be in our members those who have this reverence, who do not consider that this activity is theirs. Frankly, if you have the greater wisdom, you would carry that so far to have the sense that beloved Hilarion had even about your own physical body and your own life stream. When he wrote to St. Paul, "Ye are not your own. You are bought with a price." The price being the stripes that are paid by the Lord on your behalf. And your own body, temple, is the temple of the Most High. That is the great wisdom that we should have. And if each individual torchbearer can adopt that humility and that surrender to their own mighty I Am presence, and you add that together and add that together, it makes for a living temple that does not need to expire. It does not need to be calcified and ossified and become a worn out, cast off relic of its former self because it was no longer willing to be responsive to the living presence. This is the great hope of the ascended masters, that you and all who in time become torchbearers of the temple, even in future generations, will be so alive to your blessed presence that you and they, that all of us will be responsive to that divine direction which comes to us from the great hierarchy of light. And as long as there is that responsiveness, it will not be necessary for the casting off of this instrument of their will, this organization, the Temple of the Presence. You know, organizations can go on and they can develop their own so-called life of their own, living off of the accumulation of light that was initially received, just like individuals sometimes do. But by the time that that is going on, that perpetuation of the past is going on, life has also moved on. And if need be, life will be quite ready to begin again. In this regard, I would share with you a perspective that was given to me by beloved Master El Moria many years ago as I was wrestling with these issues and asking him how it was that he and the other ascended masters could be so free and non-attached to all that they had done in the past, unsympathetic, if you will. They weren't like me in my sense of why does it have to be this way? Why do we have to just go through and sweat great drops of blood and start all of this all over again? He simply showed me a drama that is enacted across the face of the earth, hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of times every single day. He showed me the great God presence of those life streams who had been an embodiment for their 80 years and were not yet ready for their ascensions. And he showed me the great dignified poise and yet in a very amazing way unsympathetic detachment with which the mighty I Am presence of these life streams drew the flame, the threefold flame, out of the physical body out of the emotional body and even eventually out of the mental body, taking up the good fruit of that embodiment, but not at all dismayed to cast off the outworn, no longer usable vessel of the outer self, and of that presence to go blithely on its way, unfettered and unbound by any sense of loss, that this was outside of the natural order of things. And, of course, Moria hardly had to say a word to me, but the object lesson was very clear, that if the I Am presence could and in fact did do this hundreds of thousands of times as people are leaving embodiment, why should the Ascended Masters do any less with an instrument, a physical vehicle that they could no longer work through? And of course, the story doesn't end there for those individual Mighty I Am presence, because they're very much alive and vibrant in their own level, and they have their divine plan and their divine intent, and they have eternity. And in that patience of eternity, they can abide until the next cycle of opportunity, where they pick up where they left off and go blithely upon their way, gaining further attainment and moving on and on. So it is with that God presence, and so it will be with the Ascended Master hierarchy, I have no doubt, nor should you. However, I'm sure that you can agree with me, as with the Ascended Masters, that in the great conservation of life, it is far better to maximize the usefulness of every vessel. It is certainly true for each of you. Goodness gracious, you have a physical body. It's taken a lot of aggravation to get your physical body to where it is, to get you poised where you've got opportunity. I was figuring one time how much hassle we have to do to just get the body to where we can finally do something really useful. All the things we have to do with our physical bodies before we can actually get on to doing something really worthwhile. So you have spent a lot of time and aggravation and inconvenience to be born, to gain an education, to be where you are. Why not maximize that opportunity and wring every bit of usefulness out of the present lifetime, and even make it the culminating lifetime of all of your many embodiments? For many, many of you are poised upon that pinnacle where you can indeed win your final victory and make this the crowning final embodiment of all of your embodiments. The choice and the opportunity are yours to make of them as you will. So it is as well with this activity, the Temple of the Presence. The Ascended Masters and we as their messengers are not, frankly, all that interested in having a 4th of July display that makes a lot of noise and color and lasts for half an hour and then sputters out. We are interested in this long-term view that stretches far, far, far into the future. And in that regard, we would like to lay the foundation of an activity that can stand the test of time and withstand the disintegrating factors of this X factor, this question mark factor of human nature that always seeks to introduce itself not only into personal individual lives, but lives of organizations as well. And so as part of this activity, one of the branches of our activity, which is very much sponsored by the Ascended Masters, is known as the Collegia Serapis. The Collegia Serapis will be composed of individuals who themselves have gone through 3 novitiates, periods of time of 2 years each, in which they do participate as full active voting members of the Collegia. Their primary role in the temple is to act to preserve the purity of our activity. And their sponsoring hierarch is none other than the fourth ray disciplinarian and devotee of purity, beloved Serapis Bey. They look to the purity of the teachings of the Ascended Masters, those principles of cosmic law, because error begins with those subtle shadings of departure from the plumb line of truth, that the further you carry that departure off, the more egregious becomes the pain and suffering of that departure from truth. So they are devoted to the purity of the instruction, and they are devoted to the purity of the practice of the teachings of the Ascended Masters, of those activities that we engage in our worship, in play, in recreation, in socializing, in the whole fabric of our ecclesia's life. The Collegia Serapis is the final authority, save only the anointed messengers, for the enforcement of purity amongst our membership. It is a very, very important office. It is intended, ultimately, that the members of this collegia will have a tenure that continues throughout their natural life once they have passed through those 3 2-year novitiates. This is so that they may exercise their divine attunement without fear of reprisal or recrimination in any way, shape, or form, because they will have that tenure. In the White Temple, you might recall that there are 2 towers that face the south. On the one side, you have the Shepherd's Tower. The topmost floor, the 4th floor of that tower, is the ray room of the anointed messengers and the chrysophorus. It is where they ascend into the high mountain to commune as Moses did on Horeb's height with the ascended masters. On an equal height, the only other place in the White Temple that shares that height at equal level is the council chamber of the Collegia Serapis. And it is by design of the Ascended Masters that it should be at that height, because the anointed messengers are not above the law. There is a tenet, or a motto, if you will, for the Collegia Serapis. It is an adaptation of a motto that was adopted by El Morya and Kuthumi when they began the modern work of the Ascended Masters' activities to the world. And that motto in the Theosophical days was, "There is no religion higher than truth." And we have adapted that to read, "There is no teacher, there is no teaching, and there is no tradition that is higher than truth." No person is above the principles of cosmic law, which are absolutely impersonal, and that includes all of the Ascended Masters themselves. So this collegia, then, will be, we trust, a bulwark of guardianship that will be the court of last resort, the supreme court that will decide the constitutional issues of cosmic law as they may be eventually come before this body for adjudication. The anointed messengers and the chrysophius are members of this body automatically and will participate in those deliberations with an eye to giving the instruction of the ascended masters to this body and of training this body so that should the occasion occur that there may be an interval of time between the tenure of anointed messengers, then the Collegia will be so empowered to decide. Part of the mission of this particular group is also that they are empowered to recognize those whom the ascended masters have themselves tested, trained, and anointed as future messengers. Mark this distinction. The Collegia does not bestow the messengership. They do not have that authority, nor do they consider that they do. They consider that, as always, this being an ascended master activity, that authority rests with the ascended masters. Frankly, I wouldn't want that responsibility. I consider it's a thorny issue, a problematic matter of raising up and anointing messengers. That's a story for another time. So the Collegia can be glad that really it is not their job to put prospective disciples through their paces and enter into some kind of a training program, not in the least. Their only job is the yes or no issue. This individual at this time coming before us, do they walk in the door with the mantle on their shoulders of the anointed messenger? That is their responsibility in that regard. In addition, they have the responsibility, in the absence of that individual walking in the door with that mantle, of raising up the Chrysophius. This is like an individual who does not receive the ongoing public releases of the ascended masters and deliver them as such, but is nevertheless the spiritual final authority for the temple, short of that office of giving those dictations. This is a very important thing, to have this executive, spiritual, shepherding power vested in an individual to enable that individual to lead, so that we don't have this balkanization, so that we don't have this sheep without a shepherd in our worldwide activity. So the Collegia will have that authority as well of raising up those individuals. I'm speaking of this because that Collegia will inherit, as it were, a body of teaching that, God willing, during our lifetime will be sufficiently simplified and codified throughout all of that has been brought forth to create a foundation of unimpeachable truth that can be relied upon as the basis of cosmic law. Almost the way in which the Supreme Court in Washington looks to the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and the other amendments to the Constitution when deciding constitutional law. Just so will this body make those decisions. It is the intent that this not be made up of operational administrators of the activity, that it be a body that would be independent of the board of directors who have more worldly duties to concern themselves with, and would be a balance, a check and a balance to the authority of that board of directors. Again, I'm outlining this to you in general so that you have the understanding of how best we hope to preserve the temple of the presence as a living, breathing chalice of heart flames that are bonded together and united together on behalf of the Ascended Master's work. We find that where there have been anointed messengers in the full truth of their mantle, raised up, who have raised their voices before the world, that the vast majority of the disciples who have entered those activities have done their part. They have served, they have decreed, they have sacrificed, they have given their lives in devotion to the cause. They have followed the lead of those messengers. So it is not in the purview of the many tens of thousands of Ascended Master students that we find there has been an issue ever with the ongoingness of Ascended Master activities. And I trust that that good karma that has been earned and merited down through the many decades is in large part of the reason why the Lords of Karma would see fit to sponsor yet another Ascended Master activity such as this one. So let me just go back to the point at the beginning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. There is such a thing as cosmic law in this universe. That law is unimpeachable. It really doesn't matter what one's own predilections might be, what one's own yen or desire to distort that law might be. That law is no respecter of persons. Thanks be to God that it is so. Each of you may place your feet firmly upon that law. Trust that law and push off of that law into the acceleration that leads to your own ascensions. You have it clear and simple from beloved Saint Germain. In this case, never was it more true that knowledge is power. Your knowledge of cosmic law and how to operate that law is the scepter of divine power in your own right hand. In addition to that, you have the source, the white stone, the rock of your own mighty I Am presence, that is the being whom you are, upon whom you may rely all the days of your life, come what may. And lastly, but not by any means least, you have those other ascended and God-free God flames in the Ascended Masters and the cosmic beings who form a chain of hierarchy, a golden ladder of light like Jacob's ladder that reaches from the earth to the heavens above. And as you hold connection with this hierarchy of light, which each of you can do, as you keep faith with them, as I promise you they have always kept faith with you, you will hold on, and they will, together with your own effort, see that you climb that ladder step by step until you find yourself an ascended being and you become part of that ascended hierarchy, and others in turn look to you for their deliverance. This is the great formula that the Ascended Masters have outlined for us. Your ascension will open more and more the doorway between octaves and enhance the power of the Ascended Master hierarchy. We can only hope and pray that as the message of the teachings of the Ascended Masters, that single voice with which they speak, gets louder and louder, and you help us to broadcast that message far and wide across the world, that there will be many who will rally to this path because they know instinctively that much of the babble that goes on in the world is hollow and empty and a Sodom apple that looks nice and shiny on the outside, but inside it is full of dead spores. That is what is offered up in the name of religion so much across the face of the earth, quite tragically. Those few that do speak of a certain purity of intent and purity of family life, purity of the community of the believers, they are still building their numbers by those who are leaving that mainstream faith where these spiritual principles have been so trampled upon and compromised. We are eternally grateful in the name of our own beloved mighty I Am presence. We are eternally grateful to you, beloved Master El Moria, beloved Saint Germain, our magnificent Lord Mahachohan, for the presence of the ascended master hierarchy of the Great White Brotherhood in our lives and in the world's affairs. We are grateful for the opportunity to integrate our hearts, our decrees, our life's energies, to commingle them and intertwine our own hearts with thine own. And we look to that time when more and more the ascended masters may build upon this foundation in the temple of the presence, and build upon it, and build upon it, and build upon it. And you will send into this activity those great life streams of great attainment who receive their mantle and anointing at inner levels for the various spiritual offices and missions which they are to outpicture. May they be received here by a company of torchbearers who welcome their entree, who salute their office and their mantle, and all work as one great body of the Lord for the work of the brotherhood on this earth. We thank you in the name of Sanat Kumara, of the seven holy Kumaras, of Lord Gautama, and of the Nameless One, and of the great magnificent radiance of the secret love star, which pours its radiance around the world. Amen.